Thanks for listening to the Zain Battla podcast. We officially have merch, and right now 100% of the profits are going to PCRF, Palestine Children's Relief Fund. We got hoodies, we got t-shirts, and again, 100% of the profits going right to PCRF. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I want to thank you for supporting my work. On my way here, I know you guys were ahead of me by a few minutes. So I took my phone out. I wanted to see what time you said, hey, we're going to be there in 8 minutes. And as I took my phone out, I noticed that there was a cop right in front of me at the stoplight. And as soon as I saw him, I immediately dropped my phone because I didn't want to be in a situation where the cop pulls me over and says, you were on your phone while you were driving. Obviously, as I was at the stoplight, but I didn't, the cops will try to make their case of, no, you were on your phone, whatever, right? But what that reminded me of is what you told me a few days ago about, hey, if you're in Qatar, if you're on your phone, there's cameras all around, and they'll take a picture of you on your phone, send it to your phone right there and then, and charge you a fine.
Yeah, you're lucky that you're in the US because we're still kind of old school with the way we do traffic stops and violations. Most violations come through, you get pulled over, a cop comes up to you, and then there's a subjective measure or a subjective decision that the cop has to make on whether you're worth getting a ticket or not, and then you can go to court, fight it, and whatnot. But for example, in Qatar, where I lived for a little while, all of that is automated. A radar system or a camera system will pick up the violation. It will scan the license plate number, know who the owner of the car is, send it to the owner of the car and register it against the car. And then you're able to just go on the government app and process the payment through there. And all of the consequences still apply if you have any points, if you have any things that impact your status of driving. All of that is automated. It just comes to you. There's really no need to go to court. You get a picture of your violation. So if you're unsure, if you think you didn't do it or anything like that, the evidence is presented to you at the moment. If you were to challenge it, there's means to do that. But generally speaking, the pictures are clear enough. People know when they do something worthy of a ticket, and it's just a simplified process that happens online without the intervention of any subjective measures.
They do have those traffic lights here, not the ones that say, hey, you're on the phone, but running the red lights. And I always feel that maybe 50, 75% of the time they're right, you ran the red light, but there's always that 25-ish% that, hey, I didn't run it, because I've had multiple instances where I got to a point, the situation was to where the traffic was completely backed up, my car was in the middle of the intersection, and then obviously if you're, Roosevelt Street, bro, that road's always backed up. So in the middle of the intersection, it was blocked, took my picture, send it to the mail, and I got really frustrated. Obviously, if it was some more advanced technology that you mentioned in Qatar, for example, who knows what what that technology would have determined if I was in that intersection. But I know you said that when we had our conversation that red light cameras and other types of tickets, they're insanely expensive there. Because over here, maybe you'll get a ticket, maybe it'll be $50, maybe it'll be $100, but it's way more in Qatar.
Yeah, so the idea with the entire implementation of very advanced technology to enforce traffic rules really stemmed from an effort a few years ago to cut down on dangerous driving, because it got to a point where it was actually pretty bad. And they realized that deterrence is the best way to control this. So they redid the whole fine system to where crossing a red light is about $2,000. It starts at $2,000. If you get into a car accident or if you injure someone due to crossing a red light, it could go up to $15,000 with a jail sentence. So wow. It's pretty strict. The technology around it isn't necessarily perfect, and that's why there's means to contest any violation. But I would say it's actually pretty advanced enough to where most cases are pretty straightforward. It knows how to pick up when someone does something wrong versus if the traffic conditions force you to make a decision that you wouldn't otherwise do. to your example on Roosevelt Street, I've noticed in the US or in Chicago specifically, sometimes signage gets updated faster than the radar systems and the cameras get updated. So like, for example, a light might have a no turn on red one day and then that goes away, but the cameras aren't updated to reflect that and people keep making right turns and it just flashes on every car that passes by. So like that's an example of how the traffic system needs to match the signage and the traffic conditions, or else people will get traffic violations that aren't necessarily accurate. And then they would have to challenge it, and that gets frustrating because you have to take time away to do that, and it's usually very far out, and it's not automated or smart in any way.
Qatar is relatively small though, so is there, I guess, something that de-incentivizes people from driving in the first place, such as some sort of vehicle tax or gas tax?
Nothing like that, but as of recently, they rolled out a pretty usable metro system, a train system that connects all the major like landmarks and touristy areas or attractions. So if you're visiting or if you're just like trying to go around downtown, you could probably get away with limited driving. But outside of that, you're still going to drive, and people in Qatar love their cars. So there's definitely a lot of big engine vehicles and stuff like that. There's no incentives to scale down.
You're the type of person that I look to for context about what's going on in many different places within the world, whether it's in Qatar, the Middle East, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Ukraine, Russia, because you're knowledgeable, but you're also so well traveled. I guess what has kept you in the US? If there's, I don't want to say there's this negative sentiment in the US. I mean, there obviously is, and I'm sure you have a list of cons that you can say, oh yeah, X, Y, Z, W, these reasons are why you probably shouldn't live in the US, but here you are, still here. Someone so well traveled who's been in so many places, but still you choose to live in the US. What has kind of kept you here? What are the pros that you've seen, and maybe other pros that you've seen elsewhere, but relative to weighing the pros and the cons, what's kept you here?
I want to preface that by no means I'm a political expert or any authority to speak on kind of situations around the world. I'm just a curious person. I love to read. I browse like newsletters and kind of daily updates from many outlets throughout my day. And I just like to kind of know what's going on around the world more than anything else. I would say the US is very unique in a lot of ways. Yes, it has a lot of problems, but I challenge anyone to name one place that doesn't have their set of problems,
Sure.
right? The US allows you to make the best of your situation given certain limitations, meaning that if you have a decent income, you're somewhat well connected, you have access to opportunities and resources in the US that you wouldn't have anywhere else in the world. I'll give you an example. Just going to college, I went to UT Knoxville where I studied aerospace engineering. We had a wind tunnel that we used for our projects and research that there's only 3 wind tunnels in the world from that wind tunnel. All 3 of them are in the US. 2 are like with NASA, and then the 3rd one was at UT. That kind of like resources and stuff you wouldn't find anywhere else in the world. So I think the US is very unique in that. If you know what you want to do, you can find the resources that you won't find anywhere else. The other thing about the US is that it's easy to venture and do your own personal objectives. In other places, it's not easy. The regulation for example, in Europe is very convoluted and like it's very bureaucratic. If you want to start a business, it takes you months to a year to get the paperwork done and the proper authorizations to just work in Europe, right? Versus in the US, you could start a business in hours, literally, in most places. You just could sign up for an LLC and you're rolling, right? The US allows you to do things that other places don't. Other places have a lot of good benefits and enjoyable like characteristics. For example, I was in New Zealand just recently, and New Zealand is actually like one of my favorite countries to visit. Just the attitude of everybody, the kind of the general sentiment around like living there is just very relaxed, easy. Nothing is complicated. It provides also some of the resources that like Europe or the US would give you without the bureaucracy of Europe or like the cultural negativities of the US. Like obviously like crime rates in the US are much higher than in New Zealand, for example. So honestly, like wherever you go, there's good things and bad things. It's just a matter of what you're looking for, what are your personal objectives, and how you want to go about that.
So what would you say are your personal objectives? I know you touched on a few points about ability to start a business and having the autonomy of, I guess pursuing that quote unquote American dream. Some may argue though that, the challenges of going towards that American dream are slowly diminishing, such as, the ability to buy a home or the ability to start a business because of increased competition, or I want to say decreased competition because of the fact that all these other larger businesses are starting to monopolize. Do you think those types of problems still supersede the problems that you listed in other countries that you've seen, or does it really just kind of depend on what are you trying to get out of your experience from living somewhere?
So I think the US has its challenges, no doubt, but it's still, the American dream is still achievable. It might not be as easy as it used to be, but it's still definitely doable. And kind of my approach to this is, what is the alternative? Do I just give up and do nothing and like say, you know what, the American dream is dying, I'm gonna die with it? No, I'm very ambitious and I try to make the best out of what situation I'm in. And for that, I think my goals are really very broad and like touch every aspect of my life. As you know, I love aviation. I love airplanes. It's probably my biggest passion. And like serving in that capacity is something that I do and I enjoy and I want to keep doing. Also, like venturing out in other businesses, I do consulting and strategy and management. I do personal investing and stuff like that. So all of these objectives that I have are still achievable and can be done, even with the limitations or the changing in environment in the US. Like, no one should just give up and drop their dreams because the circumstances around them aren't favorable.
Right.
Because if you just give up every time things get difficult, you're gonna literally die with like the depression of not being able to accomplish anything. It actually puts a physical toll on you and your mentality about things.
No, I mean, I do agree with you that we shouldn't just sit here and play victim and think that the whole system is rigged against us. I do see legitimacy in both sides of the argument that, oh, the American dream is still alive and well. You just have to put your mind and effort into it. And then the other side of, oh, the system is totally rigged against us now because of how expensive things are and how these businesses just control everything, how the wealthy just control everything.
See, I don't think it's either or, right? I don't think you take one of the two kind of stances on this and say, oh, it's all good, I'm gonna like revolutionize the world with my ideas and nothing's gonna stop me. And on the other hand, you just don't say everything's stacked against me, I can't do anything.
Right.
You always got to live with what's your situation, right? If things are difficult, work through them, try to change them, push to fix the system if that's what is needed. Mm-hmm. My kind of approach to anything is giving up isn't the answer for anything. Like not doing what needs to be done isn't going to serve anyone at the end of the day. So just be intentional about what you want to do. Know your goals, pursue them. If there's challenges, and there will always be challenges in anyone's path, figure out how to overcome them, learn from other people's mistakes, And look, I recognize that there's some privilege in saying that because there are some situations where people cannot do anything about them. Like if someone is physically sick or mentally dealing with something, and those are some legitimate challenges that are impossible to overcome without proper resources, I understand that. But I'm talking for the general public that live, an average American life. You still can make the best out of your situation. And the outcomes are generally better than almost anywhere else in the world. Like look at our age group in Europe.
Yeah.
The unemployment rates are 3 to 5 times higher than in the US, right? Even if you were employed in Europe, the income isn't there. The situation is completely different. So being in the US gives you a head start, even with the legitimate challenges that are slowing down the American dream.
Talk about these ambitions and all your avenues a little bit. I guess we can start with maybe your aviation ambition. I know you said that's probably your biggest ambition and biggest passion. Would love to hear about your experience within aviation. What are you up to now, and where do you see yourself taking off in aviation?
Yeah, so I actually loved airplanes since I was a kid. We lived overseas for a little while during my childhood, and we would travel back and forth to the US quite a bit. So every time we were on an airplane, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I remember on one of my flights when I was a kid, it was a Northwest flight, and the flight crew invited my siblings and I to the flight deck. And we just sat in the flight deck and took a couple pictures, and I thought, oh, this is the coolest thing ever, right? And that kind of fueled my passion for aviation. So from early on, I knew I wanted to pursue that. I went into school for aerospace engineering, and I was very intentional about wanting to pursue commercial aviation. I didn't want to get into defense aviation or space aerospace type stuff. And from that, I actually started my career in nuclear, and that kind of happened by mistake. I remember going to a career fair at the University of Tennessee, and I met with one of the recruiters. He was with a power company. And we chatted for a few minutes, and at the end of the chat, he goes you know what? You haven't stopped talking about airplanes. I don't think a power company is right for you. Good luck. I was like, okay, fair enough. I thought it was accurate, actually, of him to pick up on that and not waste his time.
Yeah.
So the next day, I saw him at another event, and I just said hi. And we talked again for a few minutes, and he was like, you know what? I'm going to give you an interview. So I was like, okay, an interview. I'm not going to say no to that. Did the interview. I ended up getting an offer for a co-op. So that started a co-op in the nuclear industry, which ended up materializing into a full-time job later. And honestly, I loved my few years in nuclear because it's one of those industries that people don't know anything about. And I got to see it from within. And now I can say I've seen the inside of a nuclear reactor, right? Eventually, I decided that, no, this is not my passion. I need airplanes in my life. I made a career shift into aviation. And it started off in engineering and the technical side of airlines. And obviously, when you have airplanes that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, maintaining them and taking care of them is such a big field. Between the design aspect of it, between the continuous improvements and reliability issues that happen with airplanes as they age, that is something that I dove deeply in. And then I was like, okay, that's cool, but let me move on to the people aspect of the airline industry specifically. Yeah. And as of 2 years ago, I made the shift into supporting airlines starting new routes and setting up airport operations in different areas of the world. And that gave me exposure to every piece of aviation. And what people don't realize is that aviation is such a complex field. One flight to get from A to Z probably touches several hundred employees at minimum, if not thousands. Okay, people don't know what happens in the background. They think it's just an airplane with a couple pilots and a flight attendant.
That's what I think.
Okay, you get on and you somehow magically end up somewhere else. But one of the things I do now is I set up operations at airports throughout the world. And we have to get governmental approvals. We have to get contracts with vendors and fueling people, catering kitchens. We have to send supplies and logistics. We have to set up technology throughout the airport. We have to integrate our systems with airports around the world. We have to integrate our systems with other airlines that we could have connecting passengers from or on, right? So like the airline industry is such a complex industry. And the commercial piece of that is that because it's very complex and it's capital intensive, it's actually very difficult to run. And the margins in it are very slim. That's why you'll hear like people always complain about like airline tickets that they're expensive.
Yeah, dude. I mean, it's so expensive to just go to. I was looking at tickets for DC, and I'm like, bro, this is insane.
But in reality, the price that you're seeing has very slim profit margins. In most cases, it's no more than like 6 or 7%, which is below like corporate averages. The average could be anywhere from 10 to 12, and you're talking about an entire industry that struggles to reach 6 or 7. And that's strictly because it's very capital intensive. It requires hundreds of people to get one flight in and out. To scale that, you're talking about thousands of employees. And those employees are high labor employees. They're like very expensive to maintain, retain, and train. Think about any flight. You have a team of pilots. These pilots have spent longer than med school times to get to where they're at, to be able to be trusted with an airplane with 300,000 people, or 300 people, sorry. And then you've got all the support staff. The support staff could be DT people, chefs that cook your meal before that goes on to flight, security teams that do security checks on the airplanes. You got cabin cleaners that get on board and clean the airplane before you get on. You got people on the ramp that put your bags in the cargo holds. You have fueling teams. So it doesn't end. It takes so many people. So by the time you pay everybody and then pay your biggest bill, which is fuel, there's no money left in your ticket for the airline. It's a very slim business. And that's why I actually like it, because the opportunity to make change is huge. If anyone can figure out a way to squeeze 0.5% out of it, that is a huge accomplishment. So I guess there's a lot left in the aviation world to discover. And that's what drives me to it, is that, okay, how can we make this better and actually more efficient for everybody? And that's something that I always thinking about. I pursued like strategy, valuation, execution, like as an MBA, to figure out how to like apply some of those like literal valuation tactics that can squeeze any benefit for anyone.
Is there a reason you drifted more on the engineering side rather than on the actually becoming a pilot, if aviation is what you're passionate about?
Yeah, so my love was for airplanes specifically. I wanted to be someone that like got to know airplanes in and out. And as much as pilots know about airplanes, at the end of the day, they operate it. They don't design it. They don't fix it. They don't work on it. And that's the difference to me. I wanted to be able to know every little detail about an airplane. Why is this that way? Why is that designed to look like this? Why is it functioning in this manner? How can it be better? All of those things were stuff that I like always thought about.
Right.
And then when I got into it and learned the kind of big themes of what an airplane does and how it works and all of that, I realized I don't want to get into like the exact detail of every little system on an airplane. Right. I actually want to understand the aviation world in totality. And that's kind of why I made the shift 2 years ago to get into like the airline business, the commercial side of it, with a focus on like operations and support of moving people from A to Z.
Right, because even to me, it's rather fascinating that this, even if it's not a huge airplane, the fact that this big chunk of metal that just because it has this wingspan and this jet fuel, that it's able to take off into the sky for hours, even like half a day, if it has enough fuel or if that's the destination it needs to get to. It just almost fascinates me even. But then thinking about it from a detailed standpoint and scanning every little thing to make sure that I'm not a very detail oriented guy, just thinking about, oh, you have to look into every single valve and every single
Yeah, reliability is absolutely like critical to safe flights. And with that comes a lot of redundancies, a lot of inspections, a lot of things that need to happen. And that's actually like where a lot of resources get put in to how do you do that to make it efficient.
yeah, because the airplane was invented around 100 years ago, and it was this
Yeah, it was
small
1903.
yeah, small two-person plane with a propeller, and it went in the air. But now, as you said, 300 plus people. I mean, I'm sure there's 767, 777, these large planes. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Look, the evolution of a flight over the last 120 years, let's say, is actually pretty astonishing. Like I was reading earlier today that a flight from the Middle East in the like 30s to Singapore would take 8 days because you had to do 22 fuel stops.
God,
Okay.
I would lose my mind.
Now that's a 12-hour flight. And that's not even considered remotely long in any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
You have flights that are approaching 20 hours now. And that's the crazy part to me, is that you have 200 tons of metal flying for 20 hours with 250 people on board or more, versus a car can barely go 500 miles without a fuel stop. But we can send 200 tons in the air for 20 hours without any issues. And that like technological advancement in the last century is just mind-blowing.
It is fascinating, but like I said earlier, there's probably so many details that go into it, and that's maybe why you went from, okay, instead of focusing on the engineering side, now I'm going to focus on the business side of it. So what is it that you're doing now? You're planning routes for.
So I don't plan routes, right? I support executing those routes by setting up the operation, by setting up all the infrastructure needed to support the flights. That includes getting regulatory approvals and kind of the proper authorizations to land into a country. And then that also takes into consideration like customer experience. Like literally, I get involved with getting agreements with lounges to making sure that the gate that we're flying from has enough seating for the influx of passengers around the flight time. And then there's the operations piece of it. Do we have proper maintenance folks and parts and supplies in the destination we're flying to? Because the last thing you want to experience is have a flight go to somewhere overseas and then a small mechanical issue happens and you don't have any support staff or any support equipment, and then the flight gets stuck or delayed,
Right.
and you can't send it back to your base hub. So setting the infrastructure from an operational perspective is a huge thing. And then there's also the commercial side of this. It's like you're sending cargo on a flight. You need cargo agreements. You need a cargo handler to pick up your cargo, send it to the airplane. It's just a lot of things happen to get one flight in and out. And then that's, even to this day, it still remains like a mystery to me and something that I'm always like, okay, why did this happen? Why is there like hundreds of people dealing with this one thing? And it's always something new. And this is something that I try to explain to my friends and kind of circles of influence, because people always complain that their flights are delayed or their flights are canceled or some issue with customer service. But a lot of times it's not the airline's fault. It's not anyone's control. Like things happen. For example, like recently I was on a flight where it was flying back to the US and the flight got delayed. And we didn't know why it got delayed. Eventually, the captain came on and said, hey, we had a passenger that checked in with luggage. Everything was normal. We boarded the luggage, but the passenger never showed up to the flight. The passenger could have had too much fun in the lounge or something, fell asleep in the terminal somewhere or something.
It also sounds like could be a security risk.
Not necessarily, right? Someone could literally overstay at a restaurant in the airport and just lose track of time. So now the regulation dictates that the airplane cannot leave with that luggage being on board without the passenger for security considerations, right? You don't want people to be sending things if they're not willing to be on the flight.
Right.
So now they have to go into the cargo holds, find that one piece of luggage between possibly hundreds of other pieces of luggage to take it off the flight. As much technology as we have, and we know exactly where the bag is and what cargo hold and stuff like that, it still requires physical labor for someone to go open the cargo hold, dig through the luggage to bring it out, send it back to the office and whatnot. That takes no less than 25, 30 minutes. In that case, it was one passenger's fault. He delayed 300 people, and the airline couldn't have been proactive about that at all, because you can't anticipate people not showing up to the airplane after checking in and after going through security. So the person is in the terminal, but you just don't know where they're at. And you can't just wait until they show up. So you have to go find the luggage, take it off, and that takes 20 minutes. And then that pisses people off.
Right.
And they blame the airline for it. So like, I try to educate the people around me on the fact that a lot of the issues that you see aren't necessarily anyone's fault. And there's things that cannot even be fixed. You can never solve someone not showing up to the airplane after they made it to the terminal.
Right. There's always footage of weird things happening on planes, people getting dragged out, people getting in fights, people saying that person right there is not real. Like, it's interesting how this culture of reasons flights are getting delayed, or reasons that that you may think that, oh, this is what's happening on the plane. Now that everybody has cameras, you can kind of see, oh, this is what's really going down. Obviously, not always the case. It's a very small percentage, but whenever I see videos on planes, I'm like, dang, when is it gonna be the time when I'm on a plane and something crazy's happening?
You know how they always say that retail workers see like the worst of people?
Right.
I think airline customer service people, between like flight attendants or like in the airport, are up there with the retail workers as far as seeing the worst of people. Major airlines in the US fly anywhere from 140 to 160 million people a year, each airline.
Wow.
Yeah. So when you're dealing with that level of volume, you get to see all kinds of things. And you're dealing with people that are happy, you're dealing with people that are sad, you're dealing with people that are under the influence, you're dealing with all kinds of situations, and you never know what it could throw at you. And it's actually funny in the airline industry that we always like kind of keep up with the best and funniest story. And one of the things that comes straight to mind, there was a flight here in the US from Hawaii back to continental USA, and someone ran into the galley and stole a champagne bottle. And before they could get back to their seat, they had chugged most of it.
Oh, man.
So you can imagine what happens to someone who drinks, I assume, that much alcohol in that small period of time really messes you up. The person started dancing in the middle of the aisle later on in the flight to where they had to restrain them. So like, even things that don't necessarily like cause harm and just like funny or stupid happen all the time. And then you add on that like medical situations, or even the unfortunate reality of people passing out or dying on an airplane, that happens. So all of these things, like for a flight to arrive on time, everything needs to go right. And by everything, I'm talking about thousands of possibilities.
There's so much that can go wrong.
There's so much that can go wrong that it could throw off one flight. And one flight throws off another flight, because that airplane is going to be used somewhere else as soon as it lands. So the trickle down effect of one delay or one cancellation is huge. And those are the things that I like capture my attention. It's like, how do you minimize the odds that are stacked against you in the airline world?
Right, because you'll see certain things that within the airline world, plane crashes, planes going missing. I don't even know how that happens, but
That remains a mystery, and to be honest, I don't think it will ever happen again because it shouldn't have happened in the first place. Airplanes don't just go missing. The amount of radar systems and communication that we have from the ground to the airplane, from the airplane to other airplanes, some mysterious things have to happen for an airplane to disappear.
I guess from here we can pivot into maybe a different avenue of either in personal finance, or you said that you have a consulting company?
Yeah, so throughout my MBA, I got connected with one of the top investment research firms in the world, and through that, I built a relationship with their CEO, and I convinced him actually to end up giving a course at DePaul University where I did my MBA. And throughout my time around DePaul and with my connection to this person, I was able to support a lot of the strategy and valuation efforts that he was providing to his clients. And some of his clients are like BlackRock and other big investment firms. So he actually was the one that suggested that, hey, you should actually do this on your own, and I will help you get clients. So I ended up teaming up with another MBA candidate at the time, and we started Shark Valuation, which is a consulting company that is a referral-based company. We don't take clients except if they're referrals through that research company that we work with or some other means, but it's limited to referrals only because we want to choose our types of cases that we work on. But it's focused on providing services in the strategy world. For example, if you want to build a strategy or pivot your strategy from what it's currently at to something completely different, you need to understand the implications of that on your business. And this is where we come in and help you evaluate that. If you want to do a merger and an acquisition and you want to understand the impacts of that on your business, we do the valuation process. We have proprietary models that are able to support kind of the forecasting of what happens if the two companies merge or if an acquisition happens. And also, we work with the structuring and restructuring of companies. So if company is going through financial hardships and they want to redo their whole business model, restructure their staffing and their just organizational build, we support with that, and we provide services throughout the life of the project, really, to make sure that we deliver the results that the company is looking at. And then we usually work with medium to small companies, anywhere from 50 to 250 employees. We've worked with a couple of bigger clients, but it's usually companies that are, most of our clients, I would say, are companies that are looking for big investments from VCs or other hedge funds. Yeah. And they need to show to the VCs and the hedge funds that we have a solid strategy, or getting such an investment is going to impact our business in 1, 2, 3. And that's why they consult with us to present the case or to satisfy the requirements that the VC is looking for before they spend the money.
So it's essentially making sure that any business that is trying to either pivot what they're currently doing or looking for investors, that making sure that they're, whether if it's for like a venture capital firm, that they're speaking the correct language to make sure that they're marketable.
Not just that, but they also need to operate in a way that is lucrative or persuasive to the VC. Because if the VC comes and looks at a company and they're structured incorrectly, the VC might say, we don't trust that you are not going to run this to the ground, and we're not going to give you the money.
What would be an example of a incorrect structure?
So, for example, a lot of companies or like startups are very top heavy because it's usually a couple of friends that like got together, they have a brilliant idea, they keep scaling it by hiring partners, right? They don't hire employees. And this is a common like mistake in growing a business is you bring people as partners where you dilute the entire ownership between so many people that all have very
Different visions.
not just that, but substantial like voices and like opinions on what needs to happen. So when the VC comes, they're dealing with so many stakeholders, and like that just makes it so much more difficult. So what we come in or like advise is, okay, who can be bought out? How can we restructure this to have a normal like corporate structure where you have top leadership with employees at varying levels to where you manage the business through proper channels or through proper executive team eventually, not just all of the employees. And that's something that happens more than you think. Another example of like improper structure is financial structure, right? Structure doesn't have to be like the organizational chart or like the people piece of this, but a lot of times young companies have terrible cash flow management. They take on way more debt than they can service, or they're at any given snapshot, they don't have enough cash to actually operate. They're always in a kind of, I don't want to use this term to describe a company, but it might kind of deliver the point. They're in paycheck to paycheck cycle to keep the operations of the company running. So we come in and show them how to properly manage their cash and flow it in a way that actually gives you the resources to do what you need, because without cash, you're unable to grow the business, really. So those are two like common things. It's one with like the actual organizational structures and who owns the company, how are the decision making processes developed, right? Who has ultimate say? Who is responsible for what? A lot of times in young companies, that's like very vague and not well defined. And then the financial structure of managing cash flow, having the resources available to you that make a VC look at you and be like, okay, we know where the money comes from. We know how you're spending the money. We know what you're doing to grow that money influx, and we're willing to partner with you. So we a lot of times we get used to convince investors to go in.
So Shark Valuation is more so for the business side, and then you also do personal finance for the individual side?
So the personal finance piece is a passion and kind of
It's personal.
It's personal, and it's
You're not going to teach us the tips and tricks we want to hear.
No, and it's a volunteer basis too. Like I volunteer with a program here in Chicago that like teaches people on personal finance, and honestly, that to me is kind of what started me in the whole like business world. Is in 2015 when I started my co-op, I met someone in Augusta, Georgia, of all places, that was at the time was day trading stocks, and Square, which I think now goes by Block, went IPO, or did their IPO literally in that time frame when I met this guy. And he kind of taught me how to start investing. And that luckily grew into a substantial like personal effort after that. And I was like, okay, I want to teach more people like the way Mike, his name is Mike, taught me. Okay. And going through the MBA and just like developing really like solid understanding of personal finance, I want to share some of that. At this point, it's all volunteer work with the personal finance pieces, but I am also thinking about, okay, how can I like do this to where I like offer like institutions personal finance like courses or anything like that to support like their employees or school systems or anything like that. But for now, like it's a personal effort. It's something I enjoy, something I think everyone should be intentional about. A lot of like personal finance mistakes happen because people don't know what they want to do with their lives. And it's usually a symptom of bigger issues. And I don't know, it's just something that I hope to be able to like influence people's life in a good way. And if I can give anyone any like tips here, I would say know what you want to do and understand the role of finances in that. For example, like if you have goals that you want to achieve, there's obviously financial impacts on you with achieving goals, whether it's a cost or whether it's a financial return at the end of your goals. Understand that implication on you and realize that finances is the tools you need and like make it work for you. The like the details of that differs from one case to one case, but everyone needs to like have a detailed budget about their lives and know exactly what they're spending on and how much they're making and how much they're spending. And just like financial education in general is something that I want to be able to pass to people so they can do good with their lives and pass it on to others.
So what financial practices do you do? Is it creating a budget sheet for like the month of January, for example? We're in 2024, and probably a lot of people are looking at, okay, you know, maybe student loan payments resumed, or maybe they're trying to buy a house and, you know, the house prices and interest rates are so high. How do I achieve these goals of either paying my student loans off or buying property, buying a car, buying whatever, right? Whether it's something, a material need, or even if they want to invest, if they say, okay, I hear that I want to put money into the stock market, or I hear that you should put money in your savings account and save up, you know, 6 months pay in case you get laid off. What kind of practices do you do either on a monthly or semi-monthly basis that keeps you on track
Yeah,
financially?
so as obvious as this statement is going to sound, I think it's literally as simple as that. Personal finance is a mathematical equation of how much you make versus how much you spend, right? And to do anything with money, you have to make the money first. So realize how much money you make and what are all of the avenues available to you to generate money or more money. And like with that, I mean, starting your own business, having side hustles, working with people that can teach you skills that you can later on make into a money-making effort or anything like that. And then there's your livelihood and your expenses and the the spending piece of your personal finance. I think all of that needs to be well documented and you have to know exactly what's going on with your life. So a budget, but a very detailed budget. People think of a budget, it's like, oh, here's a general category of, I need $500 for eating out. No, but do you realize how often you're doing that? Do you know if you're meeting those numbers or if you're exceeding them every month? Are you tracking your performance relative to the budget, right? So I could tell you to the penny with a little bit of margin, but like I could tell you very solid numbers on how much I spent on any given category last year. Like I actually track that. I know what I do. I track my performances against my goals. And then if I want to invest my money, I know that I have that margin. If I want to go out with it, I know I can do that. It takes a lot of discipline to be successful with it. And that's why a lot of people maybe fall short, is because they don't want to dedicate the effort and do the steps. So I would say doing a budget is absolutely necessary. Having goals for later on, it's like, okay, this year I know I can make X, Y, Z. What do I need to do that? What do I need to get there? establishing like objectives is something that people don't necessarily do, and they just go on with their lives. Like, oh, I made this X amount of money this month, I'm going to live my life. I don't necessarily have an objective or a goal to let this money make more money or invest it in places.
A lot of the things that you're saying, it sounds very simple to me and maybe to the viewers that, oh, okay, just make sure that your revenue exceeds your expenses, anything left over, try to invest that or plan to have investment as part of your expenses. Obviously, there are certain things that people are concerned about, such as inflation and wages not going up at the same time, housing prices increasing. So obviously, investment is a big piece of financial stability and growth. Would you say that investing is becoming more tough, or is it still doable? If it is doable, then how does one in a specific avenue of financial predicament, how are they able to invest?
I think it's actually becoming more of a necessity, right? The implications of the things you mentioned, such as inflation, for example, if you have money saved up and it's not being invested, it's losing value on inflation basis alone, right? So the necessity of investing gets more important as inflation increases, and as income, if your income's not keeping up with inflation, that means you should be looking for other sources to supplement the differences. And people have access to different investment opportunities. One of the most common ones is like a 401k or just like stock market. I encourage everybody to open up a brokerage account with any of the common brokerage services and throw some money in it, whatever you're able to do. Let that money grow. Don't also be reckless in the name of investment. Do your research, learn about it before you put any money in it, but eventually you should be investing your money. And if you're fortunate enough to have more resources and you can invest in more things, that opens a lot of doors for you. Real estate is usually good investments. You could invest in businesses and people. The ultimate point here is that you shouldn't let your money not do anything, especially in times where it gets tough, because you're losing value every day if it's not doing anything. And I'll tell you about myself. I want to eventually be able to have the freedom to say, you know what? I can make any decision I want about my life because finances is absolutely not a consideration. And you do not get to that point by saving alone. You have to invest and grow your money. So that's generally my advice to people, is that when it gets tough, that's when you should realize the importance of investing. And I've been fortunate enough to invest in the stock market, invest in a couple of businesses with people, and see fruitful results that I absolutely share my experiences with people. And you and I are actually in the process of starting a business together, and that effort is because we realize that there's opportunities for us to yield benefit to ourselves given the current circumstances of what's going on around us, without getting into kind of our idea, or maybe we'll give it a shout out later, I don't know. But without talking too much about it, seize the opportunities around you and there's no shame in wanting to have financial returns when it gets tough.
I would say you listed that in your budget, you have several categories. One of the categories that I can think of for myself is travel. And I know you're very well traveled.
That's a big category in my budget.
So how often do you travel? Where have you been recently? What are your plans for 2024?
In 2023, I took 71 flights.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know how many countries total that was, but I think it was like 25 international flights and the rest were domestic or something like that. It was a lot of traveling last year. And traveling is something that I absolutely enjoy from the moment I leave my house to the moment I get back. And that's maybe surprising to a lot of people to hear because, oh, being on an airplane sucks. You're just doing nothing for several hours or anything like that. But I actually cherish every moment on an airplane because that's when when I'm able to like disconnect, and I try not to follow my temptations of buying Wi-Fi or anything. I try to disconnect. It gives me the time to really work on things that I want to work on without disruptions. For example, like that's when I do the most reading, and I'm fortunate enough that I read a lot, and being on an airplane is definitely where I do most of it. I also work on Shark Valuation or any other ventures that I'm doing on an airplane a lot of times. It's such a peaceful experience for me to be able to turn off my phone, turn off my email, just focus on one thing for 3, 4 hours or whatever it is without any like disruptions or anything to drive you away from that. And I'll even often like skip on meals on an airplane just to not have to talk to a flight attendant. I'm like, okay, like I'm focused. I don't want anything to do with anyone right now. And I get a lot of work done. And then I get to my destination, and that's when I get to explore. I get to meet new people, and just learning about other cultures is absolutely fascinating to me. I always thought that America or the US in general was just like one big culture that is somewhat the same. You go from Miami to Seattle, it's pretty much the same, right? It's two big cities. You got the same corporations, you got the same businesses, same hotel names, everything is similar. You don't see any differences. And that was always my impression of the US until I went to Alaska. I went to Alaska and I'm like, okay, this is a completely different culture, different people that live in this land. Obviously, I'm talking here about the natives to Alaska. And I did a tour of of their culture and how they used to live, up to recently. And that's stuff that I could never imagine. I mean, living in that weather, in those conditions, with the wildlife and animals around you, you live a completely different life than what I see in Chicago.
Right.
And those are the things that intrigue me when I'm traveling. It's like, how do people live and what are the differences between societies and cultures? And because of that, I will go anywhere, anytime, and I absolutely have no problem getting lost in any country.
Do you have a top country that you're like, all right, if you don't go anywhere else, go here?
I think for that, I would say I'm going to give a general answer to like people at varying experiences with travel. I'm going to say Japan. And I say Japan because it works for someone who's been to 100 countries, and it works for someone who's never been outside the country. And you get to see a different culture. You get to see a different attitude with people and like just different order. You see people, they're very organized. Everything is on time. It's very like impressive how Japanese culture operates. And from someone in Chicago where like everyone's jaywalking and trains are never on time, you go to one of the busiest intersections in Japan and maybe in the world. I don't want to butcher its name, but Shibuya. And literally, as soon as the light turns red, there's not a single person in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
Okay? That doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
And that Japan is definitely a place that I recommend to anyone because of how different it is, but also how doable. It's easy to get there. You're not going to run into any major issues. If you have little to no experience in travel, you're going to manage just fine and enjoy it.
Yeah, because I went to Japan 2019. The travel experience, getting from Tokyo to Kyoto, it was very seamless. No trouble with not understanding the language because English is pretty commonly spoken there, especially with the workers. So I really enjoyed my time in Tokyo and in Kyoto. You get, the big city experience. You get the more traditional Japanese experience in Kyoto.
And it's beautiful.
And it's beautiful.
The mountains, the flower gardens. I mean, Kyoto is beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Japan is just a nice place to visit. And I had the mentality, and I do that anywhere I go, but when I was in Japan, I was like, you know what? I'm not using GPS. I'm gonna just go wherever my legs take me. And I ended up seeing some of the coolest things ever, man. Wow. When I went, it was also 2019, actually. It was around July 4th holiday. And they must have had some elections going on in Japan. So they had like banners of like politicians everywhere. And the funny thing is, like, they had the banners of the politicians in like anime style.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So like you'd see someone that's like running for what I assume a important position in Japan, but it's like anime style of him, and it's like everywhere. It was like that to me was just like interesting, because like you would never see that here.
Right.
Imagine like someone releasing a cartoon version of them running for president.
It would more so be mocking the candidate.
Exactly. Yeah. But no, there it was like a legitimate campaign effort that was completely acceptable, and it was just pretty cool. Like, I walked into a neighborhood that was like blocks on blocks of arcades. Literally, I didn't even like intend on going there, but I probably spent 4 or 5 hours just walking around the neighborhood, because I was like, what is this? Why is there like a whole neighborhood of arcades? Yeah. And that's something I do wherever I go. I just don't use GPS. I go wherever. It has put me in some sketchy situations. Luckily, nothing that was too terrible. But I'd rather experience those things than to say, "Oh, I wish I went there one day."
You didn't even get to my favorite part of traveling, which is trying the food in
Oh,
other
yeah.
places.
I mean,
Japan, for example, but I'm sure you've been to Europe many times. You've been to Middle East many times. Talk more about the food that you eat.
Yeah, so food and travel is a passion of mine, and I actually managed to kind of join them in a social media effort called Miles to Meal. Too bad I've been a little slow with it lately, but I intend to get back into it. Hopefully this year. That's definitely one of my objectives. And the idea of it is that I travel to places or anywhere that I'm already going. I try a local dish that is like iconic to that place, very well known. I try to go to the places that are best known for that dish. So I'll like make reservations at the best restaurants, or try to connect with the right people to get the best version of that dish in the country. And then when I come back to Chicago, I go into my kitchen and I actually replicate that dish. So I cook it, and then I compare. I don't necessarily compare like score-wise or anything. It's just like I try to see if I can get it close to what I had.
So when you're eating it at whatever restaurant you are at, you're taking notes of, oh, it has some peppery flavor, garlic flavor. Because I'm sure you can't put all that stuff to memory going all the way back. Or
totally, because I'm actually like just curious to learn about that dish anyway, right? So like I'm taking notes, I'm like looking at the dish in every little detail that I can. In Venice, for example, and I have the footage for Venice, but I never made the video yet. I need to sit down and edit it. I actually got to speak to the chef that like cooked the dish, right? And I realized that like that recipe that he was using has been like unchanged for like 200 years or something like that. He like could trace it back to like several generations. Wow. And he was like, yeah, my grandma cooked this because her neighbor taught her. And like he ran me through the entire history of how it got to him. Wow. And that was like very cool and eye-opening on, okay, I'm not the only one that's passionate for food. I want to share those like experiences with other people, let them learn about dishes that they might not be able to travel and go get. So I'm gonna make a video where people can live that, even if it's on a video.
So we got the place you would recommend if you can only go one place. What's a meal, if this was your last meal ever, what would you pick?
That's probably the hardest question for me to answer because I'm not picky at all. I eat literally everything as long as it meets my like religious requirements of like it's not pork, it doesn't have alcohol in it. As long as it's meet my religious requirements, I'm eating it. Okay? So I can't narrow it down to one dish or one cuisine, but I'll tell you this. I always thought Italian food was overrated. And I enjoyed it and I thought it was good, but I never like put it in like my top 3 or like went out of my way to eat Italian food until I went to Italy. When I went to Italy, it completely changed my perspective on Italian food, and I grew to appreciate it a lot more. So I would say my favorite cuisine is probably anywhere that I've visited because I grew to appreciate that cuisine a lot.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of cuisines.
Dang, what I'm hearing from your answer is you're leaning towards Italian.
No, I'm just saying that like the travel piece of it and like experiencing it at the location is a completely different experience than trying it like anywhere else.
Of course.
So because I've been fortunate enough to try different cuisines at their original places, I have an appreciation for a lot of cuisines, and I think it'd probably be unfair to like try to choose one.
Right. I tell people all the time, I'm like, the Pakistani food you eat in Chicago or in Texas, it's, 10% of what the actual Pakistani food you'll eat there. There's just
No doubt.
so much flavor. There's just so much, the spices, they taste natural. The cooking, it's done in a more traditional way, and it just has so much flavor.
No doubt. And you know what? I would love to do a Pakistan trip to hit up the different cities and try the different cuisines, because even in Pakistan, there's different cuisines in different geographical areas.
Right.
So I would love to take Miles Tamil over there.
All right. Pakistan Zindabad.
Let's
take it there.
All right. Sounds
Mohanad,
good.
thank you for joining today.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to be with you.
Thank you.